Welcome into episode 87 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
Last week, we looked at data breaches, how they happen, a few of the worst, and what you can do to protect yourself when, by and large, loses your data. This week, we're continuing our look at data breaches, items on the list, an example from one company of how not to handle a data breach, what are companies actually doing to protect against data breaches, and what could they be doing better? Now, you say something like, man, that place makes a mean sandwich, and that sounds good. Rare is the sandwich that seems dangerous, and rarer still the sandwich that can screw up your life. That's not really fair, though, because Panera also has soup. While there are lots of companies that we could look at for examples of how not to do it, Panera is the example that we're using of, seriously, how not to handle a data breach.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's hackers targeting a corporate system with the goal of pilfering personal data. Other times, it's actually a security researcher who stumbles across a vulnerability and alerts the company in the hopes that they'll patch the flaw. And this tends to happen when the security researcher is actually also a customer who has an account on the affected system, because they see a vulnerability that could lead to their own data being leaked. And obviously, they want that whole patch as quickly as possible. Good intentions or not, companies are notoriously slow when it comes to addressing data breaches. But some companies take the cake when it comes to handling a data breach in the worst way possible. And if this were an actual contest, Panera would take home the grand prize for this year's competition, as their response to a recent data breach was face-palmingly bad. All the way back in August 2017, security researcher Dylan Houlihan contacted Panera about customer data that he found leaking from their website. This data included names, email and physical addresses, birthdays, the last 4 digits of customer credit card numbers, and worse, each record was numbered sequentially, making it the work of but a few minutes for a potential bad guy to automate the process of collecting each and every customer data record. And those incremental customer numbers indicated that upwards of 7 million records were exposed.
Hang on a second. Is the point of the sequential numbering and how bad that is just so, it gives somebody an idea of whether they got all of it or whether there's more to get?
Yeah, well, the way this particular one happened was if you had a unique, randomized user ID for a record in a system, you couldn't easily guess your way into finding other records. Yes, you could brute force it, but hopefully somebody on the company end would notice that before you got too far. In this case, it was literally you could type in a URL from any internet browser on Panera's website and edit a number that was a part of the URL to grab a customer record, and you just increment that number by 1, you get the next customer record. So you could go from record 1 to record essentially 7 million and have all the data for those different customers.
Okay.
Whereas if it was a random user ID, you'd need to know the random user ID or program your whatever malicious, record grabber to try and brute force those IDs, which would obviously take a lot longer than something where after 1 comes 2, after 2 comes 3. So basically, he noticed this and he contacted Panera. And at first, they appeared to dismiss his findings as a scam. And later on, they said they were taking it seriously and they promised they were working on a fix. 8 months later, the website was still leaking customer data. I guess it sounds like Dylan had been checking this every month or so and getting more and more upset that there was nothing changing, no fixes were in place. So he contacted Brian Krebs, a security reporter. He's been the news behind a lot of the major busts and security news out there. He's got some really great articles. So he was hoping that because of his position as an authority in the security world, that Krebs might be able to actually kind of light a fire under Panera's collective butts and get a fix in place. And to their credit, Panera got right on the ball fixing things within hours of Brian Krebs contacting them. Except they didn't really fix things at all. They simply made it so you had to log in with a valid user account before you could view everyone's records, as opposed to how it was previously when anybody in the world, with or without an account, could view the records. So they made it a little bit more secure, but not really. They also claimed in an interview with Fox News that only 10,000 customer records have been exposed. Turned out that that 7 million number that we were talking about earlier, that wasn't the whole story. The flaw didn't expose data only from the customer loyalty program. It also affected their commercial division and subsequently impacted a vast number of catering companies. So the most recent estimates put the scope of the data breach in excess of 37 million customer records, which is just a bit more than 10,000.
Wow, that really is a great example of how not to do it. So, I mean, just so I'm clear, because it sounds like the first thing they did to mitigate it was they said, okay, well, you have to actually log into an account. But that's still just me as like a Sandwich Club member, right?
Yes.
So like if I had an account with Panera, for my loyalty program, they basically put me behind a wall that 6.999 million other people were in. So as long as they logged in.
And if you didn't have an account,
right,
you could just sign up for one. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's a loyalty club. It's free. Yeah.
Wow. All right. They do make a good sandwich, though. Let's give them some credit. All right. So Panera, example of how not to handle a data breach. We want to look now at what companies are actually doing to keep their data from being lost or stolen.
While it might seem like all companies are equally horrible when it comes to protecting user data, we're really only seeing one side of the story, because the only time this kind of thing hits the news is when a data breach occurs. We never hear about all the things many companies are already doing to protect their systems and your data. So, what are some of the things that some of the companies are doing right when it comes to protecting against data breaches? Well, we've talked previously about how some companies tend to hide their heads in the sand when someone tries to tell them they have a data breach problem. Some companies take the opposite approach and will issue an across-the-board password reset for all their users at the slightest hint of a potential data breach. As long as they're patching their systems to close the hole the attackers used, this is a great way to get users to take the threat of a data breach more seriously as well. When it comes to the security of your credit card information, rest assured that your bank has your back. Banks and credit card providers are well aware of the fact that data breaches can go undetected for long periods of time, or that a company can be less than timely when it comes to fixing their busted and insecure systems, even after a data breach has been reported. Because of that fact, they have systems in place to automatically identify abnormal credit card usage, which could indicate potential credit card fraud. If your bank has ever asked you to confirm specific charges on your account, you're seeing this system in action. Banks and credit card companies also take things a step further and scan the dark web looking for databases that are for sale. If they find a database that contains credit card information, they'll get their hands on a copy to cross-reference it against the credit cards they've issued to users. If they find a match, they can preemptively cancel your credit card and issue you a new one. Because credit card companies are generally the ones liable in the event of credit card fraud, as long as it's reported in a timely fashion by the cardholder, it's in their best interest to stay on top of potential data breaches. Still, we'll count this as a win-win for both credit card companies and cardholders alike, as it saves everyone a bunch of headache and stress.
Can we go back to something in that really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Banks and credit card companies are scanning the dark web. They come across a database of credit card information. They get their hands on a copy of that. What you're telling me is banks and credit card companies are buying databases on the dark web.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, it's one of those things where they won't come out and say it, but yeah.
I mean, that reinforces the
yes. And the thing is, those databases. When you talk about the potential monetary numbers for fraud that could occur were all those credit cards abused,
right?
It dwarfs the cost that the bad guys are asking for. I mean, they ask for pennies on the dollar, or fractions of a penny on the dollar for credit card numbers, for account numbers in those databases. So yes, the banks are technically helping the bad guys out, funding them by buying the database, but at the same time, they're saving a lot of money by preemptively closing those accounts down before they can be used for fraudulent purchases. So it's kind of the lesser of two evils type thing.
It's a protection racket. It's almost a protection racket, except, of course, the bad guys from whom they're buying the database, aren't protecting them. They're just fine selling you. Okay, you've got 10,000 or 20,000 or however much. They'll sell it to you. They'll sell it to the other guy, too.
I'm sure, however, they're, paying the bad guys, whether it's a cryptocurrency or, monetary transfer or whatever. I'm sure they're also involving, police in that, FBI, whoever, in that, okay, we're going to pay these bad guys their ransom. If, it's not even really a ransom. We're going to pay this for this account. We're not necessarily going to say we're a bank buying this data, but, keep an eye on this, cryptocurrency address, or keep an eye on this bank account number that they provided. So I'm sure there's also, the criminal investigations going on in the background there. They're not just blindly saying, oh yeah, have the money. We don't really care who you are. They would want to know who these people are as well, for potential prosecution.
And don't misunderstand. I'm not saying, oh, the bank shouldn't be doing that, because I totally get it. If my financial information is sitting in a pile with a bunch of other people's, and the banks see a way to protect all of us, I want them to do what they can to protect all of us. It's weird to hear, well, one of the ways they might be doing that is paying the people who stole it in the first place.
And they're paying with cryptocurrency. It's not like they could pay with their credit card and just do a chargeback or something.
Chargeback. That'd be pretty great, though. And banks aren't the only ones who are playing it safe when it comes to your credit card information. E-commerce companies go to similar lengths to limit their risk when it comes to potential data breaches. Pretty much any company that is doing business online will turn to one of the e-commerce companies to handle the actual sale and payment of their products. And that's because pretty much the last thing you want to do is to be storing customer credit card information and end up having your site get hacked. That's a big deal. So instead, e-commerce providers will take on the responsibility of handling those sales and credit card transactions for you. And in return, they'll take a small cut of each sale as payment for their services. And there are strict rules in place for companies that handle cardholder data in order to process those transactions. Reputable e-commerce providers adhere to the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard and are thus PCI compliant. Most e-commerce providers don't actually store cardholder data either. They only use it to process the transaction that takes place at the time of sale. Things will work a bit differently when it comes to recurring billing, so for subscription-based products or services. When an e-commerce provider needs to rebill a customer on a regular basis, they'll make use of a third-party credit card vault and tokenization provider. Under that setup, the e-commerce company hands control of the cardholder data over to the third-party credit card vault, who then takes on the responsibility of securely storing the cardholder data. And in return, they provide the e-commerce company with a token that can be used in situations where recurring billing is required. So basically, like we said earlier, where most businesses online will want to be offloading the risk to an e-commerce company for the sales. In that regard, the e-commerce company wants to offload the risk to a credit card vault for actually storing that credit card data if it's needed for recurring billing. And the credit card vaults are held to even higher requirements and standards as far as security goes.
So that's what the companies that we're dealing with are doing today. In your estimation, what could they be doing better?
Well, first and foremost, the number one thing companies can do is make sure that they're storing the data in a secure format. That way, even if their system gets hacked and an attacker gets a hold of the database, the data itself is encrypted in such a way that it would take years for an attacker to brute force their way in. Well, let's back things up for a second. The number one thing would be for them to minimize the amount of data they collect from users in the first place. The less data they collect, the less data they have to worry about keeping safe from the threat of a data breach. Next, they should make sure that their systems are up to date with the latest security patches and updates. Even if a system seems relatively unimportant in the overall day-to-day functioning of the business, it still needs to be locked down tight, security-wise. Leaving even a single system unpatched can have severe consequences when it comes to hackers getting a foothold on the company's system. In the same vein, a company needs to make sure it has good internal network security as well, and the system security in place to keep an eye out for abnormal internal network traffic. Companies need to avoid keeping copies of sensitive data, such as list of usernames and passwords to the company databases, laying around in plain text, accessible to anyone on the corporate network. Sure, it might make it easier for bill and accounting to help the interns get up and running with the payroll systems, but it also makes it easier for Ted the hacker to make off with the contents of said payroll systems, which is totally bogus. Our final suggestions for things companies could be doing better is simple to set up and a bit harder to handle on a day-to-day basis. A company should set up a good point of contact for security researchers looking to report vulnerabilities. This could be as simple as an email address or a contact form on the company's site, but it should be A, easy to locate, and B, something that's checked by a human being on a regular basis. Now, this doesn't need to be a full-blown bug bounty program, which isn't feasible for everyone, especially smaller companies, but there should still be a way for someone to get a hold of the company in the event that they find a serious security hole on the website or company systems. And yes, as part of this setup, the company will need someone to handle reports sent to that point of contact, and that person should preferably be the same one who handles computer and network security for the company. There will be a lot of false positives that will come in, either in the form of regular spam because the company posted an email address online, or coming from wannabe hackers saying they'll fix your system for bitcoins, but wading through the junk mail is worth it for the one time that a real problem is reported by somebody.
So, as we tend to do on these shows, we just covered a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time. If you want to go back and check over some of the stuff that we talked about, or maybe dive deeper with some links to the information that we used to construct this show, there's a website that we would love for you to go to. It is securemac.com/checklist. You'll find notes there for this show, every show we've done before, and every show that's going to come after once those shows actually show up. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.